Well, I am a native of Salisbury, North Carolina, and jokingly tell people Southern born, Southern bred. When I die, I'll be Southern dead. And I was born April 10th, 1937, at 612 West Monroe Street, because I was born at home. And my mother often said that the doctor, this was Dr. Coleman, who was really a West Indian. He'd been there forever to me. And he said, as long as everything is okay, you can be born, I could be born at home. And my godmother, who was a licensed practical nurse, lived in the 500 block of West Monroe Street. She was not only my godmother, we're pretty sure that she probably delivered me and cleaned me up and handed me to my mother, because the doctor said as long as everything goes okay, there's no point in you going to, really to him, why are you going to go to the hospital and spend all that money when you can be born at home? And my mother said, oh, everybody just talked about your daddy and said he was too cheap to take me to the hospital. And it wasn't that at all. But at that time, he couldn't have been at the golf course because they didn't have one at the head. He couldn't have gone to it. But we figured that Mama Young, as we call her, she was Mrs. Pearl Young. Her husband was some high official at Livingstone College. That's how they were there. And my mother roomed there when she first went to Salisbury to work after leaving I guess Virginia, where she was. And so I was born right at home and grew up right there. And it was an apartment. And it was built by this Dr. Goler, who was, I think he was Canadian. I believe he actually came from Nova Scotia. He built most of the houses on that street. And we lived in that house, in that apartment, until I was in the 4th grade. And a distant cousin owned the house with the round porch that I showed you. And she had promised my father if she ever sold that he would get first dibs on it. So he and this doctor who later moved next door, not Dr. Coleman, but another doctor, I think we're in it as to who had first dibs. And my father did, so he got the house ready for us to move in. We moved in that house when I was in 4th grade. And you had the apartment building and Miss Dawkins' house, and I don't recall what was next, but Dr. Ezel, who did not get our house, built a new one in there. And of course, we would run down in there when we were told not to, because you were talking about red dirt, which in North Carolina, in that area, you have a lot of. And it was like, just like skating on the paint. You get down there and you couldn't get back up. And it would be the biggest mess because we weren't supposed to be down there in the first place. But anyway, that's how I grew up there when I was in 4th grade. I always have to think about that because I think about now that I can't drive. Not only was I moved from my home, I can't drive anymore either. And so I have to depend on people to do things. And whereas I was used to going to church every Sunday, even after I retired, as a deacon, I could go back to church. Priests could not go back in the church from which they retired for a year, but that didn't apply to deacons. We decided that I would go back, give people a chance to kind of get over it. People who should have known better and bragged about being cradle Episcopalians would come out with the weirdest things like, you just come on back anytime you want to preach. Timothy will let you go up there. Well, of course he could not let me go up there. And so I stayed away, I guess, for a few months. But after that, I would drive, and go to church every Sunday. And now I don't do that because I would just have to beg somebody to please come and get me, and I'm not up to that. So you go, to me, it's part of your life. It's part of who you are. I listen to people who say, oh, honey, I haven't been to church in probably 5 years. And I'll always look up like that when they do, and I think, well, you know where you won't be going. I sort of associated with, it's part of who you are to me, because that's how I was brought up. Even when I rebelled, it's like I knew I should have been in church, even when I wasn't. To me, it's like when you're breathing, it's simply who you are and what you would get out of it. If you truly, to me, believe in God, then going to church is part of that. But that's my belief. That's what I believe. It quite apparently does not bother other people. There were a lot of things that I grew up doing that a lot of my classmates did not. And that really had to do with where I lived and what my parents did. Most of the kids that I went around with were not from families where their people had finished college. We had one in Salisbury. When they got a black mayor, they lived in the 500 block of West Monroe Street, and I was in 600 block. And you're talking about a black Lutheran minister. I don't care where you go, you're not going to see that many black Lutherans. That's all there is to it. And he had two sons and two daughters. Both sons ran grocery stores. One not only ran a grocery store, but he had some kind of concrete business as well. But they were all pretty well off. And one became mayor. His daughter finished Fisk and married a med student, and so they grew up more like whites. And growing up for me with my father, see, my father taught science at the high school. Raymond Lancaster's father was the coach there. And her house was really 2 doors from mine. I think she was probably 701 or 700 West Monroe Street. And her grandfather, she and her sisters were younger to begin with. So when she got to high school, I really don't know what high school was like for her. For me, it wasn't always like that pleasant, because whoever my father had to get after that day for anything, I was the one that was going to hear from it. You run up to your locker, what's so-and-so doing today? They'd all turn and go, and I thought, oh, here we go. And I remember high school graduation, my mother said, I have just never been so embarrassed in my life. Everybody else came out at least looking a little sad that they were leaving Price High School. Not you. You had to come up literally dancing up the aisle. And I told her I was so glad to get out of this place. I didn't know. I didn't know what to do. There were some good times, too, but you were always walking a tightrope. Simply because you lived on Monroe Street. Never mind men who worked for the railroad really probably made more money than my parents did, but my parents had college degrees. And so it took me a long time to figure out I wasn't responsible for that, so why do I keep taking responsibility for it? I don't want to label everything that ever happened in Salisbury like as bad, because everything wasn't. And when I look even with the church, that was different. All the black churches had vacation Bible schools, and so what they did, they were very smart to do it. They listed them so that it went across the whole summer. You didn't have any two of them in competition with each other. They decided who was going the first 2 or 3 weeks in this month all the way through. And I think I probably played for those two. Half the time they didn't even know what they would be serving until they talked to somebody from some company who said, oh, we'll send popsicles out so they'll have something today. But we always had something. And I remember after I finished college, I thought I needed some kind of little job where I wouldn't have to go and ask for money. And my mother said, well, if you just stay here maybe and have dinner start dinner when we come home, it'd be such a big help. I said, well, when I ask for some money to get some shoes or something, since I'm too good to work, I really expect you to give me this money. So I told my father, I said, I need $20. And he said, do I look like I have $20 to you? I said, well, you said I didn't need to go work. And the next day he had a job with the Recreation Commission. And even then, things were still segregated by race even then. And this was after I finished high school. Because I went to what was the black elementary school in East Nashville, which was Lincoln Grammar School. And they had a wading pool. And I had this big key, and I would go open it up so the water run out. They could play in that, and then shut it off after an hour or so, and then walk back home. And then I worked at one. That's how I knew who Derek Anderson and those were. I don't even know if they would remember me. But I stayed down where the little children were and worked with them. And then I go back, the one night a week they had square dancing out on the big basketball court. And it was real square dancing with one woman, Marie Miller. Yeah, her big brother was the math teacher at the high school when my father was the science teacher. And then I finally got a playground of my own over in Jersey City, what they call Jersey City. I often wonder sometimes what it even looks like down there now. So it was interesting growing up in Salisbury. There were weird days, and then there were good days. And even after I got here, when I was at Peabody, I knew I could still vote back home with an absentee ballot. And even that didn't work. It was always something to remind you that things basically, there was always going to be something. And I told my mother, I said, you need to go down and get, this absentee ballot. She said, I can't do that. If I do that, they'll know I'm in here by myself and they'll come and get me. And I thought, what is she talking about? Of course, I didn't realize that really that was the beginning of the onset. I think it pretty well started after when my father died, because he literally just had an attack and literally dropped dead. One interesting thing that happened, I think one summer, I know there were 2 times I went to visit college friends, and I was coming back home on the bus. and there were a number of people, so I was sitting, I think probably past the middle in the back. I guess by the time we got around Greensboro, which would have been 50-some miles from Salisbury, and the last people got off the bus. I think it was a local, where they were just stopping everywhere. Whatever it was, the driver looked back there and he said, "No, I'm not picking up anybody else. And I'm not going to yell all the way back there, too, so you just will move on up." And I thought, well, it's his bus. So I got up and moved. I don't know if I was right behind him or to the right. And when we pulled into the trailway station in Salisbury, he said, don't get up. He said, "Is that your father standing out there?" Because he just saw one black man stand there. And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, you just wait." And something told me not to ask what for, just let it go. And he pulled up and he got, trying to think it was my bag inside the bus. Anyway, he said, "You just sit there." He got out of the bus and then stood there and held his hand up. And we had talked, on the way. He asked, was I in school? And I told him, yes, where I went to school, everything, that I was home for the summer and everything. And my father standing there trying to figure out what was going on, I'm sure. And the driver held his hand up for me to come down the steps. And then he said, "Just a minute while I get her bag." And he went and got a bag and brought it down. And he held his hand out to my father to shake his hand and said, "Well, you should be very proud. Your daughter is doing very well." And told me how she's doing in school and everything. And maybe I'll see you on another ride sometime. I said, "Well, maybe so. Thank you very much." We got in the car. And my daddy drove, and he said, "Did I dream that?" I said, "I don't think so." He said, "Your mother ain't gonna believe this one." I said, "That's up to you to make them." So it was almost like in the midst of stuff, there's always going to be one good thing that still happens, so that you're just not seeing all negatives, because there's still just as many negatives now. They're just different in a way. And apparently I asked her for it because the cross, you don't see crosses like this, really. And she said, I can't do that because somebody I can't give it to you because somebody gave it to me. And I said, "Well, when you die, will you leave it to me?" And all these grown-ups went, "Oh my God, no, that child didn't say that." Well, I didn't know I had said it. And she said, "Yes." She said, "When I think I'm dying, I'm going to call your mother to come and get the cross." And she said, "And when I give it to you, don't ever put it on a chain." Well, I didn't know what that meant. And sure enough, my mother called one night, and she said, "Miss Minnie called and asked me to come down and get the cross. Said she knows that she's leaving soon." One day I said, "Oh, where's she going?" She said, "She's going to die soon, and she wants to make sure I have the cross for you." So it was on a cord, and I wore it on the cord all through high school and college. I didn't realize it till I looked at some yearbook pictures, and I had that cross on. And one day the cord, an old cord, broke, and all I had was a chain, and all of a sudden it was gone. I didn't see that cross for the longest time. And I was going somewhere, and somebody crossed in front of me, and I slammed on brakes to stop, and it slid from under the car seat. And I never put it on chains again. So it was so old by that time that this top, if you look at it, it's almost through. That's how long I had worn it. And I guess, I don't know how long she had worn it. And I took her to a jeweler, And he said, I don't think I should touch this. And he said, I want you to go to so-and-so. This was a jeweler on, near, what is it? Behind West End Methodist Church. And he said, I'm the one they send for everything. He said, I can tell you right now, just don't wear it anymore. I said, what do you mean? He said, if you put any heat on this, it's probably going to just explode. He said, so just carry it around. She took care of Crittenton's sister. And we went down to her house. She cooked for the high school principal, who was single at that time. His first wife had died. And she cooked meals for them and did all this cleaning and stuff. She never thought she was good enough. She was always praying to be a better person, this and that. I think they just really used her pretty much. But we would go there for Lenten services, and I can still remember kneeling on that hard wood floor. And they were the shiniest floors I'd ever seen. I mean, she waxed those floors. And you were kneeling down there on the little bony knees, and I would go, and my mother would say, don't start. And she would reach over and literally get some skin. She said, don't start. And I said, And she said, sit back up. And I could barely get up. But it was something else. St. Philip's was really very interesting when I look back and think about it now. It was just a little wooden structure. And it was interesting in that it was a mission, but we sang everything. Even if there wasn't an organist, we still sang everything. For years, I could still remember all of those old little verses and things that we sang all the way through. It was, you don't want to say automatic so that it was like you just do it, but it almost was. And we always had different priests. I actually grew up thinking that there were no black priests because I didn't see any. There weren't any, not in Salisbury. I found out years later that they had a black Episcopal church in Charlotte with a black priest. And I thought, wow, now that's really something. Because I had never seen one. The ones we had were all very good. And in fact, I brought my confirmation certificate. And that, of course, was the priest who became the bishop, who actually closed it. He closed it to get everybody to go to St. Luke's. And I can remember the conversation with my parents that a lot of people were complaining at St. Luke's, because he said, you will all go to St. Luke's where you will be welcome, knowing that that wasn't true. I can remember, that was Moultrie Moore. I can remember when, the one after him, I can't think of his name now, when his wife was pregnant. I don't know if she was the one who extended the invitation to the women at St. Philip's to come to the meeting, to her house to the meeting. It was the parsonage, really. All the women got up and walked out. That's what I heard, because they were not dealing with black women coming in there. And that was hearsay. So he addressed that by telling them, I've heard that some of you are disturbed with the women from, with the members from St. Philip's coming here, because they will come here as members of the church. Or the women were put into what I still call the circles. And he said, and if you have a problem with that, we will certainly miss you. He made it clear they are coming. You will welcome them, and if you have a problem and you leave, you will always remain in my heart and in my prayers. But they are coming. And so they did. When I was growing up, Bishop Pinnock was there, and he was as racist as they come. By the time Reverend Moore became bishop, things had really changed. When I brought my mother to stay with me because she had Alzheimer's, they had one lady who, I don't know if she volunteered or if it was her duty, but she wrote my mother every month for the 2 years that my mother was there with me. Every month that letter came. And it was always a newsy letter. I mean, it wasn't like some form letter. She made sure that there was news about somebody that she knew my mother remembered or something in what was the black neighborhood. You know, knowing that she would remember anything about the college, about Livingstone College, or about the people who lived on the street. But that's pretty much how it was. And we went to, I think it was 8 o'clock service, so that when we got back home, because it was around the corner, we walked unless the weather was bad. My father would start dinner, and then he would take me down to Soldiers Memorial because I went there for Sunday school, and my grandmother was still there. That's why he did not, I think Helen had said that he was a member or something. He didn't become a member until his mother died, out of respect to her as the widow of a Zion minister, because my grandfather, my father's father, was not only a Zion minister, turned out he had graduated from Tuskegee Institute. Nobody knew it. I asked my aunt, I said, why didn't you ever say anything about this? And she said, I just didn't think about it, I guess. And I'm like, how could you not think about it? Because that meant he was one of the early black graduates. He died in July, the year I was born, 37. So I really don't remember him. But when it was closed, I guess when I look back, that's how I found out. Because even my name was on some letter, and it was my father's handwriting. He put it in there with me being a member of the church. And then I can't remember the man. They had some man who wrote, he's well known in North Carolina, and I can't remember his name, who wrote the history of the Episcopal Church in North Carolina. And that's when I really found out a lot about what was going on in the church, because the black priests were from the central to the east, going east. You had one in Wilson, Father Johnson, Robert Johnson, and he started a camp. I went to an Episcopal camp when I was 10 years old outside Raleigh, because we couldn't go to Vade Mecum up in the mountains. Oh no, you weren't going up there unless you were going to cook or clean up. You could go for that. And I can remember reading in this book how Father Johnson would beg money at the convention, and at which he wasn't getting. I think the women's group supported it. And it was wild. I grew up a lot going to that camp. My mother started me with piano lessons when I was 3 or 4. So I had no memory of not being able to read music, because I learned to read music before I learned to read. I didn't stay with it. The teacher I had then got married and she left. Then another one came, and then the first one came back. So I was starting over. But I always knew how to read music, and I majored in it in college and taught it. That was the hardest thing I had to teach kids, how to read music, because I had no memory of just learning how to read music. I always knew how to read music. And when I got to college, I'm trying to think that I started in high school. I may have started in high school as summer vocational organist at the black churches. Um, I remember I didn't drive, and my father would take me, and sometimes he would wait. Most times he would go back home and then come back. But I was relief organist at 2 or 3 black Baptist churches. And he would come in and pick me up. And they paid. That's how the little spending money I had. And my mother told all of them, she said, now she can play at any of your services. And they were all in the evening, not the morning services, but the evening services. And she said, but she is not to decide who does what. You all arrange who's 2 weeks. It would be when the organists had their 2 weeks vacation in the summer. And I would do 2 weeks at this church. I can't remember the church that's down from Soldiers Memorial. I just can't remember that. Probably the Presbyterian church, which was right behind St. Luke's. It's been gone for years now. But there was a black Presbyterian church right there. Then Soldiers Memorial, then a black Baptist church, straight down the side street, not the cross street. They're what I always call the you can't do this law. You can't do this, and you can't do this, and you can't do that. Everything was segregated by race, even your schools. The last week of school, the teachers always had what they call art gum. It was about this big, maybe about that big. And you got all of your books, and you erased, and they had a certain kind of tape that if it was torn, you taped it, because kids being promoted to the next grade had to use them in the black schools. We never had new books. We didn't even realize that, I don't think. You spent that time getting things ready for the next year. Commencements were at night because the superintendent of schools would be at white schools during the daytime. You didn't go. It was like I had to stop and think where I couldn't go, because it was so automatic. I mean, you knew where you didn't go, or you knew that you stepped aside on the sidewalk to let white people go by. Certain stores you didn't go in. The main one was like the biggest women's store in Salisbury was Purcell's Richard Dopkins. You didn't go in there. When they finally let us in, I think I had started teaching by that time. And they had one where my mother could shop and try on something to see if it fit. The others, you didn't try on the clothes. You looked at them, but you were not allowed to try them on. And they called her, I remember they called her Nicholson, because she always signed everything as Mrs. John W. Nicholson. Therefore, they could never call her Lethia, because they didn't know her name, and she wasn't going to tell you her name. She didn't have to. Indeed, she said she didn't have to. So everything was segregated by race. The city buses did not run in the black neighborhoods. So if you were going, right. I'm trying to think, was I in high school when they finally opened? They had youth nights downtown, and black kids could go Maybe it was like the last Thursday or the last Friday in the month. But otherwise, that was for the white kids to go to. You didn't go in any swimming pools. Um, to this day, you will have more black kids who can't swim than white kids. And my mother's hairdresser lived, trying to think what street was that. We were on Monroe Street. The cross streets were Hoorah, something. You just walked there. You just walked everywhere. And when they finally did get the buses, I generally didn't ride because I just wasn't going to sit there and wait for the bus. I could be halfway downtown by that time. And by living right at Monroe between Marsh and can't even remember all the cross streets now. Anyway, I just soon walked to town and walked back. But things were segregated by race. That was just it. That was everything. The church as well as everything else. When I had to come home, I think that summer I came home and I knew that things were going to have to change. The house was a mess. And it finally dawned on me years later, when I brought her to stay with me, I took her to a church psychologist who also worked with elderly people. And he worked with me as well. And I found out there was a lot that I needed myself, not just dealing with her, but really just getting along in life. And I would take her to St. Luke's. And I remember thinking that was one of the coldest places I'd ever been in my life. And I wasn't used to going in a church feeling like that. I played for churches here in Nashville, at Holy Trinity, at a Baptist church, at a Congregationalist church. I have, up until coming here, I don't think I've touched the piano that we have, and the barbershop quartet meets here every year, and they gave the piano that they used. I remember playing it about a couple of times. I don't think I've touched that piano probably in a few years. But St. Luke's was just a cold place to me. And then when she died, I knew I was going to have to bring her back and have her funeralized from there, because that was her church. What was his name? Mayo Little. That just came to me. I hadn't remembered that to write that down. When I went down, I went down there because I wanted to change my membership. My membership was automatically put there because all of St. Philip's was literally put there. And I told him I needed my name to come out because I wanted to membership to be at the church here in Nashville. And he told me how she was doing. He said, if you notice when she walks, she scuffs her feet. And I had noticed it. It were things that I didn't want to see. And he said, and the back of her clothes are always soiled. And that really got to me because I realized how I thought that happened. When she first went to work at the welfare department there, they told her that, oh, no, you do everything that everybody else does, blah, 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 which wasn't true. They told her that she could certainly use the bathroom, but she would have to clean it when she finished. Now, that's what the maids did, and she was not hired to be the maid. And so she didn't go. She would come home in the summer. And I thought it was really neat that my mother came home. in the summer because she certainly did not tell me why she was coming home to use the bathroom. And how, if she went at 8 o'clock, she made it to 12 noon to come home, especially with a menstrual period. And they didn't have Tampax back then. I don't know how she was making it. But I will always believe that had a lot to do with it because she was so used to holding it because she was not going to scrub a bathroom. She wasn't hired to scrub it. So when it was time to bury her, May, as a male little, called to tell him that she had died. She was a member, what we were like. And he was just as nasty as he could be. You know, we don't do that here. That may be what you people do. And I thought, you people? After all this time, I'm a you people again. And our priest in Nashville was very disturbed by that. And he said, you know, we can take this out of town. I said, yeah, we can. We can take this to a black church in Greensboro or wherever. It's simply not her church. That is her church. So he said, okay, you let me call. So he called and got it straight. I think it was because I wanted her picture on the front. And they weren't going to have that at St. Luke's. So anyway, we got that. And they had to wait the night before because of her sorority. And because that's how black people are funeralized. They have all that. And I remember that Mayo Little came and he shook people's hands, announced that he had a prior engagement. He wouldn't be able to stay. I just looked at him like, I'm surprised you're here at all. I don't think I said that. Probably because somebody was holding my arm going. And the black ministers, who were all AME Zion and Baptist and Presbyterian, told him not to worry, they would be there to take care of the family, since he would not be able to do that. So the next day at the funeral, you know, when they stood and said everybody, you know, was welcome to come, the blacks lined from where we were sitting back, and not one of them moved, because that was to show what they thought of that church. Because by that time they knew what had happened. So they had to drink a whole lot of wine that day. I would like to be able to say that I really don't know. I told a friend of mine, I said, when you sent all of this, I said, you know, I thought I had tucked all that stuff away and packed it up, and you go on with life as it is. And to have to think about going back to do this, I really don't know. I'd like to think that I could say, I forgive you. And that's it. I'd like to think that I could do that. I'm not sure you actually do. Some people do. I remember as a child, they had this Governor Bilbo in Mississippi. And you had Strom Thurmond in South Carolina. And there was something that Bilbo did. And I remember saying it to my mother, oh, I would just go on these tears. Oh, God's going to do this. God's going to do that. You just wait and see. You just wait and see. And she said, you are not a Baptist preacher, and you ought to just cut out some of that stuff. And she said, I can't remember if he was governor or senator. Whichever it was, she said, when you look at pictures of him, you will notice that he is always very happy. He is going to continue to be happy because that's how life is. And so you need to just stop talking about what's going to happen to him. Nothing is going to happen to him. He is going to continue to live a full life, being the segregationist he is, and seeing black people hanging out of trees and everything else. And that's just simply how life is. And you need to tend to your own little affairs and stop worrying about Bilbo and these other people. There's not a thing you can do about that. There's not a thing any of us can do about that. And I said, well, you just waiting to see. And I think I said something about where he was just going to go straight to hell in a handbasket. And she raised her hand, and I looked up, and I thought she was getting ready to hit me because she couldn't believe. Now, this was not a woman who would just turn around and pap, slap people. Because I used to wonder in schools when these kids would say, oh, girl, my mama took that broom and about knocked me out of so-and-so. And I think, well, why did mama ever do something like that? I don't have anything to talk about. Because all she did was her version of spankings. And then she would say, and this hurts me much worse than it does you. And that was, for me, like, really it. I think so, because when you look at the things going on now, we thought that was over with. We thought that was over with. And most people who are liberal now attribute all of this to Donald Trump, a lot of it to Donald Trump. And I think it was hidden. We thought we were doing better. We thought that was over. And it really never was. It was just hidden. And now it's back up and very open and active and very frightening to see people acting this way. And it's not just quote white people. You know, people like say, oh, those white people are doing this, those white people are doing that. No, you got blacks and other races that are just as racist. It's just it never did like go away. We thought it had gone away. I found one thing with the memory loss I had, and I think just getting older in some respects. I don't finish any. I buy these books and never finish them. And I remember how you had people who talked about Michelle Obama, who's just a brilliant woman. And people would say, well, you know, she's not the only smart one. I said, I am certainly aware of that. Joe Biden's wife is brilliant. These are all brilliant women. But if you listen to sometimes what they are saying about Michelle Obama, you realize that we really haven't gone much anyway. They've got laws on the books now. That by law you can't do this and you shouldn't do this or the other. I don't know how much things have improved, really. I'm really not sure, because when I look at the Bishop of the Diocese of Tennessee, with his ruling that if you are gay and you remain in a relationship, you're not coming through in this diocese. Oh, you didn't know that? Oh, yes. And I feel sorry for him. I really do. I remember once, this must have been last year sometime, he was there, and I thought, oh, I need to go back here and speak to the bishop, because when they recess out, they always stand at the back. and everybody comes through that way and then goes out. And so I went back to speak to him, and I thought, oh, God, I'll be in a line forever. And there was no line. The people at the cathedral consider themselves as to be really just so liberal. I don't care for his stance, but he is still the bishop. He did not ordain me the three bishops back. So I don't know. They use a different kind of racism now. They're using sex instead. And anybody in our diocese who wants to be ordained, if they are gay, can go to Kentucky, because that Kentucky is just literally right across the river. When I went to seminary, I went in Lexington, Kentucky. That was the Diocese of Lexington. So we went there. But I just don't know. They just pick somebody different each time. And we've got one person now. He and his partner are legally married, and he is a nurse at Vanderbilt. Had a really hard time in life before they married. He and his son was somewhere swimming, and something happened with the son. He drowned. I think he drowned. And this Richard, I can't recall if he broke his back or something in his back. He was on a really bad way for some time. And his partner wouldn't come to church with him for a long time. They went to St. Anne's in East Nashville, which is known as the, quote, gay church. You do have more gays there than you do at any other church, and it's always been the welcoming church. But I just still have a problem with that. You're still segregating. And Stephen is now in the process to become a priest. So I'm pretty sure if he goes all the way through, he will go through Kentucky. Because we had one nurse who's a PhD nurse who decided he wanted to become, is he a deacon or is he a priest? He's a deacon. But even with that, he had to go to Kentucky. And he would keep blaming our current bishop. And I remember talking to him, and I said, you keep blaming the bishop. You had an option. You chose what you wanted. And so you got what you wanted. You didn't get to be a deacon in this diocese, but you got to be a deacon. And this bishop is not going to live forever. He may indeed live many more years, but he won't be a bishop all those years. But you made a choice. You had a choice to make, and you made it. And you need to get off the bitterness and stuff. You're not going to make it do it. Who do you think is going to come and listen to you talk about the bishop? I wouldn't. Well, how do you take it? I said, because that's his choice, not mine. Oh, it was pretty bad because the bishop I was under threatened said that he might not even ordain me. And I made a very bad mistake. He said that he had been told that there was something in my behavior he needed to watch for. And I said, well, what was it? he said, well, I really can't discuss that. And I forced his hand, which I should not have done. I'm trying to think what I said to him. I said, oh, I know what I said. I said, a person on death row has the right to know what he's being sent to the electric chair for. And so you have to tell me. I shouldn't have called. Well, number one, he should not have told me. But I forced him to do it. And when I found out what it was, I knew that I had crossed the line. I never should have, because I was not going back to the person who was being accused of having said something I did. I went to the priest where I was assigned and told him. And he said, there's something that's not right in that. He said, because you fell out with people here. And I never had to intercede. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, you and so and you. And I said, well, how did you know about that? He said, why could you think that these people, this is their church. You've been assigned here. This is their church. They chose to be here. Did you think they weren't going to come and tell me what happened? He said, especially the finger pointing one. And I thought, oh my God. Of course, they went back and told him. And he said, so what we do is clean up the mess. I think you have to become more welcoming. I remember he went at the cathedral that, like, what are you doing to welcome other people? And then you have to be careful with the answer you give. When you say, well, if you're talking about black people, more black people would be in the Baptist church than would even want to come to the Episcopal church. Well, now that's a statement you just cannot make. Because the first thing I would say was, well, what black people are you talking about? Because that in itself is a racist statement. I was trying to think at the cathedral. And I don't know if they're still doing it now. They moved their greeters, instead of being like sort of inside, they moved them literally to catch you as you almost going down the street. And it's like, what people are you talking about? Because the assumption is you're always talking about, if you're in the South, that you're talking about black people, as if black people are the only minority.